Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us in today's webinar session for Reporting Matters 2022. So we'll make a start. Before starting, let me just introduce myself. First of all, I'm Blanca Gray. I'm the manager for the Reporting Matters project. And just a couple of housekeeping remarks before we start. So the session will be, it is being recorded, and the slides on the recording will be made available shortly after the webinar to all of you. And also, please feel free to put out any questions by using the Q&A function in the main control tab. Next slide, please, Miriam. Okay, so what are we going to cover in today's webinar? So first of all, we are going to, well, actually there is a slide before that, Miriam, so yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, these are, as to introduce ourselves, so I will be one of the hosts of today's session. As I said, I'm Blanca Gray. I'm the manager for the Reporting Matters project, and I'm joined today by Julian Hill-Landolt, director of the Member Support and Business Intelligence units at WBCSD. I'm also joined by Jennifer Black, Sustainability Reporting Director at Radley Gilder, and by Miriam Chaco, Associate for Reporting Matters team at WBCSD. Today's panel will include Henry Rosenthal, Director, Group Sustainability for CLP Holdings Limited, and Austin Kennedy, Sustainability Reporting and ESG Performance Manager at Philip Morris International. So what are we going to cover at today's webinar? So first of all, Julian will take us to a brief overview of how Reporting Matters project fits in within WBCSD. Then Miriam will take us through the key findings for the Reporting Matters cycle. And then we'll have Jennifer giving us a perspective from Radley Gilder. Then I will take you through the consultation that we ran back in July around the how Reporting Matters framework needs to evolve given all the key trends that are happening. And finally, the last half an hour of the session, we'll be delighted to speak to our panelists at CLP and Philip Morris International. So hope you enjoy the session, and I'll hand over now to Julian. Please, Julian, over to you.
Thanks, Blanca. Checking I'm not on mute. Hope everyone can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Lovely to have you with us for the launch of the 2022 Reporting Matters report. Which also happens to be the 10th edition of the publication. So just start off by saying a huge well done to the team at WBCSD, the analysts, Blanca and Miriam, who led it from our side, and of course our partners, Radley Elder, without whom Reporting Matters wouldn't exist. So a huge thanks to everyone who was involved. And obviously all of you are members for the work that you've done again this year to improve the effectiveness of your reporting, and thanks for joining the call to hear all about how that has gone. I just thought I'd like to spend a few minutes at the start of this call talking about where Reporting Matters now sits within WBCSD. As most of you will know, there's been quite a bit of change in the last 12 months. We relaunched our strategy, we reorganized ourselves around our strategy, and so Reporting Matters has moved a bit, and I thought it'd be useful just to give everyone a quick reminder of what the team looks like now that's looking after you and where we sit. So the slide that's gone up shows these three core blocks of our 2022 to 27 strategy of imperatives, pathways, and of redefining value. Basically, the strategy's sole focus is to simplify sustainability and focus all of our efforts from WBCSD side and from our members on averting the climate crisis, restoring nature, and tackling inequality. It's all built off Vision 2050 Time to Transform, which has those three global challenges at its core, and it gives us and our members a way to work together and accelerate action on these interconnected global issues. So if you move to the next slide, Miriam, I'm just going to go through what's in each of those three areas of the imperatives of the pathways and redefining value quickly. So The imperatives are basically these three core areas of sustainability challenges: climate, nature, and equity. These are the big initiatives within WBCSD that companies can rally around, and that will form the foundation of the transformational change that's required. And then within these core areas, we have our own sort of flag tentpole projects like SOS 1.5 in climate, or the work that we're doing to help launch the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, or in equity, the Business Commission to Tackle Inequality that we launched last year. Also within the imperatives are two cross-cutting services that we offer to our members. One is called, everything's an acronym in this world, PAM, the Policy Advocacy and Member Mobilization Team, and they really work with the members to coordinate the messages we take into big global events like COP27 that just happened, that just finished last week. And then there's our team, the Member Support and Business Intelligence team, which has 4 areas within it, which really represent the core services that WBCSD offers to its members. So at its heart is Reporting Matters, which Blanca leads with support from Miriam and the team of analysts that do all of your reviews each year. And then working closely with the Reporting Matters team is the Membership Criteria Support Hub, which is run by a lady called Uta Jungermann and supported by Juliana de Rosa. And they are responsible for the membership criteria assessments and the management of the membership criteria, and working with members to support them in their efforts to increase their adherence level. So those two teams work very closely together because the criteria assessments and Reporting Matters are quite closely linked. They're carried out by the same group of analysts. Then there's those of you who don't know, we have a global network of 60 regional business associations. So we form a sort of an alliance of common purpose with these 60 independent organizations all around the world, working with businesses. They represent about 6,500 businesses worldwide. So we can coordinate what it is that WBCSD does with its members at a global level, but also then push that through out into different geographies, and also learn about what's working and what's not working on the ground in those geographies, and feed that back into our global efforts. And then finally, there's a new unit called Business Intelligence, which is going to work to basically take the outputs of all of these different pieces that we have within the Member Support and Business Intelligence unit, and turn these into ways that allow WBCSD to focus its efforts more clearly on where members need their support, to understand where the gap is between how we're doing with our levels of progress and where we actually need to be, and to turn all of that into some form of insight and understanding around the impact that we're having as an organization and as a community of companies. So, and then I'll quickly zip through the other two because I've said the bits that are important to us. So then there's the Pathways group. Those of you who've read Vision 2050 will know that we presented these 9 pathways that covered the essential services business provides to society, and outlined the radical transformations that are needed within each of those. We're not doing all 9 within our current work program. We've decided to focus on 5 pathways where we have really strong engagement with the value chains in question. So energy solutions for the energy transition, food and ag solutions for the food system transformation, transport and mobility solutions for a radical shift in how and why we move people and goods around, built environment solutions to reimagine our living spaces, and products and material solutions to create a vibrant and profitable circular economy. And then finally, redefining value, which is where Reporting Matters used to sit. This was the unit that was launched by Rodney about 10 years ago. Rodney's now become our COO. And so a new leader of this group has been hired, a man called Pepijn Rivers, who used to be one of he was amongst the founding group at Booking.com. So he's got some amazing experience from a truly disruptive sector, and now he's going to be helping us to work on taking redefining value to the next level. However, at its core, it's still trying to do the same thing. It still believes that capital markets can unlock the speed and scale of action that we need to see by rewarding sustainable businesses with a lower cost of capital. And Redefining Value's work program is going to continue to support vital global efforts, such as the TCFD, such as the launching of the TNFD, in order to bring that financial perspective to specific transformation agendas. And so basically it's split into two main areas of work, the CFO network and embedding ESG into decision-making. And within that, they'll have three main projects: redesigning financial system architecture, capital market engagement, and building out the ES in ESG. And so if anyone has any questions about any of those areas, by all means, feel free to write to Blanca or to me, and we can point you in the right direction. But that's just a really very quick overview of how WBCSD is going to be supporting you over the next 4 years now. We've already had a year of it. And where this new Reporting Matters team sits. So thanks to everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. Wishing you a very interesting set of speakers and discussions. And with that, I'll pass it over to Miriam, who's going to give you the overview of the publication.
Thank you, Julian. So yes, I'm going to take you through the project overview and a bit on the framework and the key findings. And I might be going through this a little quickly, but really the publication is available online. So of course, if you do have any questions, please feel free to, write to us outside of this webinar as well. Okay, so with the project overview, it's really Reporting Matters is a partnership between WBCSD and Radley Yelda, and we review the reports of WBCSD member companies against the Reporting Matters indicators, and the review cycle every year is from April to August. So we use the data from our analysis in two ways. For members, we prepare confidential scoring dashboards, and these dashboards include anonymized benchmarking against the company's peer group, region, and sector. We also have one-to-one feedback sessions with member companies to discuss the scoring dashboard and the identified areas for improvement. For the larger audience and the public, we have our annual publication, in which we make available the reporting trends, good practice examples, and guidelines on effective reporting. So for the assessment criteria and the evaluation framework, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. It's just to say that it is a holistic framework that covers 18 indicators across 3 main categories, and that is principles, content, and experience. The principles category draws on the fundamentals of reporting, covering key aspects such as materiality, balance, and external assurance. The content category analyzes how priority material issues are managed by the company, and then how that is disclosed upon in the report, covering key elements such as governance, strategy, and implementation and controls. The experience category looks at how the report meets the needs of specialists as well as generalist audiences, or in other words, how well the report engages the reader. And this category looks into the accessibility of the report, its messaging, and design. As Julian actually mentioned earlier, this is a team effort. Reporting Matters is a team effort, and WBCSD's partnership with Radley Yelda is a long-standing one. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the team at RY for their great efforts, especially towards preparing the annual publication and their support throughout the reviewing process. So thank you, Sally, Jennifer, Juliet, Imogen, and Lisa. Individual commitment to a group effort is a good way to describe the how for Reporting Matters. Besides Blanca and myself, the individuals on our team reviewing the reports were Kinga, Matthias, Ellie, and Stefano. So thank you for all your hard work. And also we would like to thank Karim Sabri, our main technical support at WBCSD. Last but definitely not least, I want to thank Julian for his excellent leadership and guidance. So coming to the key findings, having reached its 10th year, we are able to show a decade's worth of work that has gone into running the project and the impact Reporting Matters has had. Reporting Matters started in 2008 2013. And since then, 1,623 reports have been reviewed, 671 feedback sessions have been had, a 30% increase in overall score has been noted, and a 700% increase in the number of companies scoring over 70%. Moving on to key findings, to make sure that we are comparing the same set of companies, the trends shown here using 2019 as the baseline covers 113 companies. Of these key findings, it is promising and worth noting that 93% have improved their overall scores and 34% have improved their materiality score. The future of reporting is indeed digital, and while 98% of members use an offline first approach, these companies produce a fair amount of online content to cater to the interests and needs of different audiences. I'm sure most of you would agree that materiality sits at the heart of sustainability reporting. From our 2022 analysis, we found that 98% of companies undertook a materiality assessment process. From among the different mainstream reporting frameworks that are available, GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, continues to be the popular one, with 76% reports referencing GRI standards. Another interesting trend to note is the increase in reports that reference TCFD recommendations, which was 78% this year compared to 58% in 2020. When it comes to external assurance, 95% of companies sought external assurance this year, showing an improvement from 82% in 2019. Looking at the level of assurance attained across the years from 2019, majority of the reports have a limited level of assurance. So with this, I've covered the key findings and the highlights really. And with that, I will pass it on to Jennifer, who will take you through the next few slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Next slide, please. And hello, it's such a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Jennifer Black. I'm Sustainability Reporting Director here at Radley Eldar. And as has been said, we have a long-standing partnership with WBCSD, and this 10th anniversary edition is really quite the milestone and a cause for celebration. Reporting Matters, as many of you know, was created in 2013 with the aim of improving the effectiveness of sustainability reporting practices, and that aim remains true today. So the theme for this anniversary edition is reflecting on a decade, gearing up for the future. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to bring you on a whistle-stop tour of some of the key changes that have been happening in the reporting space over the last decade and take a little peek at what's to come. Next slide, please. Firstly, I wanted to take a look at scale. So large global companies, they tend to lead in sustainability reporting and provide us with a useful gauge for broader trends that are eventually adopted more widely. So with this in mind, there was a survey undertaken this year which examined how many of the world's 250 largest companies produce a sustainability report. And a whopping 96% of them report on sustainability or ESG matters. So it's true to say that sustainability reporting has well and truly accelerated into mainstream business practice. And in fact, the only companies in those 250 that don't report are based in China. And however, the expectation is that this will change in the coming years because reporting regulations were introduced mid-June this year, stipulating that listed Chinese companies must now disclose environmental and social information. Next slide, please. So this leads me to my next question. What's driving so many businesses to report? Those reputational drivers, the ambition to communicate your sustainability endeavors to your stakeholders, meeting the needs of employee expectations, regulatory obligations. There are literally so many things I could have picked out to put on here. But essentially, the primary purpose of a sustainability report is to communicate relevant and useful information to stakeholders in order to empower decision making. So ultimately, our aim is to build understanding, engagement, and trust with those stakeholders, and of course, to communicate what's genuinely important to you as a business, rather than simply following your peers or running through a checklist of responses to standards, disclosures, and so on. Next slide, please. So as I said, one of the primary drivers for business to report is the regulatory landscape, which is undergoing a period of significant change at both the global and regional scale. And over the last few years, it's all been building up to this moment of convergence amongst the reporting standards and frameworks. So this year alone has been a bit of a game-changing year in those reporting regulations. There were 3 important consultations on non-financial reporting standards that were published. At a global level, we had the International Sustainability Standards Board, or the ISSB. They proposed global sustainability related disclosures. At a regional level, we had the EU CSRD that were published very recently. And in North America, the US SEC's climate disclosure proposals were issued. So that's just the top 3 that I've picked out, but I wanted to focus briefly, very briefly, on the ISSB, whose aim is to create a global baseline for sustainability reporting standards by harmonizing the standards and frameworks that are out there in the market. So they're seeking to create a global baseline, which will give us consistent, comparable, and decision-useful content with year-on-year comparability. And ultimately, the overarching aim here is to have one set of standards for reporting to the investor community on enterprise value and related information. So the intention is that such a change will help level the playing field for businesses and give users a better understanding, a better chance of understanding what they're reading. So these newly created ISSB standards are a consolidation of 5 reporting standards. So that's the CDSB, the IIRC, the SASB, the WEF IBC metrics, and TCFD recommendations. And main thing to keep in mind here is that these will become, so these ISSB standards will become mandatory over the next 5 to 10 years, if not quicker. So really my key takeaway from all of this that's happening this year is that once finalized, these developments will move us away from a world of voluntary disclosure, where it's up to you as a company to decide what you want to say and how you want to say it, and into a mandatory reporting environment where the company is told what it must say. However, I would add a note of caution here that these regulations are primarily focused on the investor audience, so we must be mindful, I should say, not to forget about our other stakeholders. Next slide, please. So the next change I'd like to pick out that's happened over the last decade is materiality. Interestingly, when I went back to our very first reporting matters in 2013, a key finding from that referred to the fact that materiality was underutilized and required more attention. So fast forward 10 years and that landscape has changed dramatically. So move over standard matrix, double and dynamic materiality are the new kids in town. Next slide, please. So this really is a pivotal year for materiality. The EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or the CSRD, they've doubled down on the subject, and they're asking companies to show their inward and outward impact, which is also known as double materiality, and they explain what they're doing to address those potentially negative impacts. So what do we mean by dynamic materiality? Well, essentially, that acknowledges that an issue or an impact can materially change over time along a sliding scale. So double and dynamic materiality, I've picked out the EU here, but it's also a central premise of the newly formed ISSB, as well as a principal foundation underpinning the revised GRI Universal Standards, which are effective for all reports published from this coming January 2023. And then the final point to mention here is that materiality, while it's often seen as a reporting tool, this is a very limited viewpoint of what can be achieved. It's a strategy tool and should be used as that. So this renewed focus should result in materiality being used more strategically and lead to a change in how companies consider impact. Next slide, please. So next up on our whistle-stop tour is a point on balance. Another key finding in the very first Reporting Matters publication, it referred to the fact that some reporters do not disclose information on the challenges they've encountered and focused exclusively on positive stories and performance. So that was back in 2013. Now, I would say, actually, I think that this is still a challenge today. There are still many reporters who find it difficult to report on business, what they perceive as business failures, missed targets, perhaps some poor performance. And this barrier perhaps is coming from some more risk-averse senior management direction, who may have the perception that reporting on the negatives could lead to a bad reputation or loss of trust or credibility amongst their audience. However, as I'm sure most of us know, hopefully all of us know, reports are so much more genuine, trustworthy, and engaging when the positive stories and achievements are reported alongside the challenges and risks that the company may face both now and in the future, as well as the corrective measures that the business is planning to adopt. By not providing that balance, we reduce the credibility of our reports and also the comparability of reports. So what we're really advocating is to bring in a level of balance to each and every report. And by doing so, reporters will both build their credibility with their audiences, but also set the standard for other reporters to follow. Being transparent and open about aspects that haven't gone as well and sharing those experiences, it also offers other businesses, other stakeholders, the opportunity to learn from their challenges. And I'd add to this also that the rise of assurance, changes in this materiality approach, and the harmonization of regulatory frameworks should hopefully in part address some of this challenge. Next slide, please. So most of these frameworks that we've been talking about, the indices and standards, they focus on ESG, which, as I'm sure you all know, stands for environment, social, and governance. And ESG is a subset of sustainability that only focuses on the impact of environmental, social, and governance related issues internally on the business, rather than the business's impact on the wider world. So essentially, ESG is an outside-in approach, and because it's all about the impact on the business, ESG disclosures are primarily aimed at investors to help inform their investment decisions. So in contrast, sustainability is a much broader concept, focusing on the wider external world and a much broader range of stakeholders outside of business. So an organization's sustainability disclosures should take an inside-out approach by assessing the impacts of the business in relation to the world around it, rather than just the impact of the wider world on the business. So I wanted to bring this up because there is such a discussion happening at the moment. It's very hotly debated, the sort of ESG versus sustainability. Are they interchangeable? Do they mean the same thing? And so that was my point about picking it out, really to understand actually they're quite different. They're similar, but quite different approaches. And it's important that we remember that. And also the significance of this ESG discussion and agenda is really exploded amongst the investment industry, investment community. So it's important for us to recognize that it is an investment tool, which raises that question of, aligned with the meaning of ESG or definition of ESG, but what are those ESG ratings actually telling us that we are hearing so much about? So first off, ESG ratings, they're designed to look at the financial significance of ESG issues. So these ratings or evaluations, their focus is on financial risks to a company's bottom line. By looking at the impacts of the ESG factors on a business, as I said, not the impact of the business on those ESG factors. And secondly, the ESG ratings, well, they tend to assess how well companies manage risk compared with their peers and not across industries. So to give an example of this, carbon emissions, say they will affect the rating of an oil company far more than that of a fast food chain. So this means we actually see situations where a fast food chain, where if they happen to increase emissions from one year to the next, they could still improve their overall ESG rating and their environmental score. And that's because other ESG factors are more financially relevant to its sector, such as packaging and waste. Which means that it's the packaging and waste elements that are actually could be driving any negative impact on the rating. So the key word really in all of this is the financial aspect, which brings me to my last point, that ESG ratings, they are not climate ratings. They are not telling us about the environmental outcomes that we actually feel that they are telling us about. So next slide. So building on that previous slide, a misconception that we often see as I was trying to articulate, is the idea that ESG is all about measuring the positive or negative impact that a company generates. So linked to that is the idea that a company with a high ESG rating is also one that makes the world a better place. But if we take a look at how MSI, they explain their rating system, their ratings are designed for one purpose, which is to measure a company's resilience to financially, material, environmental, societal, and governance risks. And their ESG ratings provide a window into one facet of risk to financial performance. So they are not a general measure of corporate goodness, a barometer on any single issue, or a synonym for sustainable investing. Next slide, please. So with those points in mind around what ESG is and crucially what ESG isn't, and all the regulation that we briefly discussed, I would urge you all to mind the gap. The current regulations and standards are all principally aimed at the investor community. So the public discourse that's currently dominated by these feverish discussions of ESG and investors, and they are important stakeholders, but really we need to remember that they are not our only stakeholders, and that there are those wider stakeholders who are looking for and increasingly not finding information on topics that are relevant to them. So be that current or future employees, not-for-profits, government bodies, and so on. So there is a tension here with the pressure coming from and prominence of ESG investors as a key audience. But I added this symbol here for those of you familiar with the London Underground or the Tube. You may be familiar with the announcement, as you board the train, to mind the gap. And I really want, if you take one key takeaway from this session, it is do not forget about those other stakeholders. So next slide, please, Miriam. So with the audience point in mind, just as we all have a preferred radio channel or podcast that we like to listen to, audiences have their own preferences for how they access and source content. And they also have their own preferences for what content they're seeking to access. So quite simply, different audiences want different content. Employees, customers and partners, policymakers, and so on. They're looking for a range of content from deep dive disclosures to top line engagement. And this is where multi-channel reporting really comes into play. So by multi-channel, I mean your report itself, web content and digital sites, blogs and opinion pieces, social media, LinkedIn content, policies and statements, intranet employee comms, white papers, other forms of thought leadership, just to name a few. So a key way to build engagement with your audiences is to diversify the channels you use to communicate your sustainability content. So as you seek to broadcast your message of your sustainability efforts and the outcomes, it is vital to consider the myriad ways to reach the diverse audience needs on their channel of preference. And this type of approach, it prioritizes audience needs to offer tailored communications, and with all of that with the aim of actually driving engagement with your content. So final slide for me, please. So to round off with a question that we are constantly asking ourselves at RY, and as we work with WBCSD on reporting matters, is just what is the vision for reporting over the next decade? So undoubtedly, we will see continued convergence and streamlining of regulations and standards, and that shift that I mentioned from voluntary to mandatory sustainability reporting. We anticipate the continued integration of ESG and sustainability related content into financial reports, driven in part by regulatory changes. We also anticipate a redoubling of efforts to produce more targeted audience-led sustainability reporting. And linked to that, the ongoing digitalization of the reporting landscape in two key ways. So one first aspect is around the digital taxonomy, for example, that are emerging, and all the efforts that have been underway to make it easier to collate and analyze data. And as AI continues to advance in this space, it's likely that we will see more customizable experiences where users can slice and dice data to get their own customized views. So this is already happening in some areas, and I would see that accelerating. And it will ultimately drive the accessibility of our reporting efforts. And the second aspect of digitalization here is what we have picked out of one of the key findings that Miriam talked us through, was that increased use of online and digital reporting formats, that trend is set to continue. And finally, my last point is that the sustainability report, all of these changes that are going on, it will continue to hold value as a standalone report and crucially as a piece of strong communications. So with that, I will hand back to Blanca. Thank you.
Yes, I'm muting myself. Thank you, Jennifer. Certainly important points. They are included in your presentation. Before I continue, may I remind everyone, please feel free to include any questions using the chat function, and we'll try and address them during the course of the session. Okay. Well, thank you. But I think Jennifer's presentation has provided me with a nice segue to the next set of slides that I want to present you with. And obviously, given all the trends that we've just heard, and taking into account the different reporting business practices, from talking to our members, we thought that after 10 years of Reporting Matters, it was the perfect opportunity for us to think about how Reporting Matters needs to evolve and needs to be developed for the next 10 years to make sure that remains fit for purpose and continues helping our members improving the effectiveness of their sustainability disclosures. To that end, we ran a series of consultations back in July this summer, where we invited a few of our members and also some of our global network partners that have been using the framework for a number of years. And the key questions that were asked during those 4 sessions can be grouped as follows. So the first theme were included questions around the value of reporting as an enabler for change. The second theme included questions around measuring the effectiveness of audience engagement. The third theme were included questions around the regulatory landscape developments. And the last 2 themes were delved down a bit more specifically into the framework, into the criteria and the use of the Reporting Matters process. As you can imagine, those set of questions or themes sparked really an insightful debate and feedback that I'm going to summarize for you in the next slide. Okay, so what we heard from, on broad terms, can be grouped into six main themes. So first of all, we heard loud and clear that there is an appetite for change in terms of the Reporting Matters framework, coming particularly from companies that have been using the framework for a number of years and are already more mature in their sustainability reporting. Secondly, certainly the regulatory developments that are currently taking place are a concern for the vast majority, if not all, members that participated in the consultations, as well as those who answered our survey. Thirdly, we heard loud and clear that the framework, the Reporting Matters framework, should and can incorporate the emerging indicators, or common indicators that are emerging from the advisory bodies such as EFRAG, the Securities Exchange Commission, and the ISSB. So particularly they're strengthening the areas of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. Fourthly, absolutely, and this is something that obviously has been discussed by Jennifer in the previous presentation, investors and regulators have certainly become key audiences. However, other stakeholders remain equally important. So that tension between, having to cater for all these different, greater range of audiences. We also heard that as a consequence, direct consequence of this increasing set of different types of audience requests and demands that has impacted on the number of communication channels that are you are using in order to to meet the requirements of the reporting requirements of all these different stakeholders. And there is a greater use of different sources of communication, such as a website, newsletter, social media, digitalization of reports, etc., etc. And finally, we've seen you've been telling us that yes, this consolidation of data, repurposing of data trend is obviously on the increase to meet those specialist audiences as well. So this is in a nutshell the summary of the feedback that we've heard from those members who participated in the consultations. Thank you, Miriam. In terms of the so obviously now taking that into account, taking the feedback into account, but also looking at the key trends that are taking place in the wider environment. I'm just going to summarize what are the key trends that we are looking at so that Reporting Matters needs to respond to. So first of all, something that we've discussed at length, regulatory developments are coming into effect in the next 3 years. Particularly, ERFRAG is already asking, it's already going to demand the first reports to be ready using their reporting output, hopefully coming in the next few months by 2025. So these will drive change in the way in which companies are structuring or organizing their sustainability reports. That's definitely a key trend that we are considering when developing the framework. Second trend, business reporting practices. We've seen, especially this year, reviewing all our members' sustainability and annual reports, that those reports continue drawing on the integrated reporting framework, but we still see sustainability and financial information sitting side by side in hybrid reports or indeed in separate reports. And obviously on top of that, new disclosure obligations have emerged, such as standalone TCFD disclosures, human rights commitments, documents, which obviously increase the number of reporting outputs that our member companies are having to produce and develop. Another trend, and this is certainly not new, is the audiences and communication channels have increased in order to meet the demands of all these different key audiences. And finally, something that we also need to take into account when developing the framework, the Reporting Matters framework, is the different maturity levels that are that we find across the membership in terms of sectors, geographies, and businesses. So looking at the feedback that we've heard from you, looking at the key trends, how Reporting Matters can respond to these trends. So again, following the same buckets that I've just mentioned, to start with regulatory developments, well, one of the ways in which the Reporting Matters framework can be developed is by strengthening the criteria to prepare members for these regulatory changes that are coming, strengthening the criteria of governance, including potentially, sub-criteria such as remuneration or business conduct, etc., strengthening the criteria of strategy and how the strategies are being affected by the risks and opportunities that companies are identifying as part of their risk management and materiality assessments, strengthening the areas of metrics and targets, as well as impact of reporting. So obviously, these are different ways in which the Reporting Matters framework can respond to these trends that I've just mentioned earlier. Secondly, in terms of business reporting practices, one of the ways in which we can respond to that is by strengthening the criteria of materiality, something that has been referred to and discussed by Jennifer's earlier presentation. So, in enhancing the materiality criteria to incorporate that concept of double and dynamic materiality, that's something that certainly we are thinking very, very closely, and we are considering moving to incorporate as part of the framework moving forward. Third trend is to do with what I said earlier, the diverse audiences that those reporting outputs need to meet and the increase in communication channels to meet all these different demands. So one of the areas in which we can help our members is by, again, reinforcing the criteria of conciseness and alignment so that all these different reporting outputs don't lose that context of the data within which the data sort of operates, and so that, you know, that sort of concise narrative or consistent messaging doesn't get lost on the different reporting outputs. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the different maturity levels, that's something that we also need to consider. And potentially by doing deep dives with those companies that are a bit more mature in their support, in their sustainability reporting, looking at how reporting drives action internally, particularly across the areas of climate, nature, and inequality. Anyway, today's session is is hoping to give you a flavor and an clear indication of where we are, what is the direction in which the Reporting Matters framework development is heading towards. But obviously, there will be other opportunities for all our members to provide feedback and input into the development of the framework, and between now and the start of the new cycle in April next year. So, so please, any feedback, we are more than welcome. But please do join us for the sessions in December and March next year. Okay, so hopefully that has given you a good taste of what was coming. Again, may I remind you, please, any questions, use the chat function, and we'll try to address them during the rest of the last half an hour we have. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to invite our two excellent panelists for the last session of the webinar. So first of all, we have, I would like to join and to welcome, well, and first of all, to thank both of you for taking the time in your busy schedules to talk to us today. So we have Hendrik Rosenthal, Group Sustainability Director for CLP Holdings Limited. Hendrik is responsible for the group's sustainability-related strategy, reporting, and communication. Welcome, Hendrik. And secondly, I also would like to welcome and thank Austin Kennedy. Just quickly, go to my notes. So Austin is a sustainability reporting and ESG performance manager for Philip Morris International. Austin is manager in the sustainability team at PMI with expertise in corporate sustainability disclosures and integrated reporting. So thank you both. And first of all, to say that CLP and PMI have been long-standing participants of the Reporting Matters project. Dare I say, maybe from the beginning of at the start of the project back in 2013. So I'm going to start with you, Hendrik, with a question that again is very pertinent, very relevant to what we've been discussing during the panel. So so how does CLP sort of deals with all this, the tension between different audiences asking for, different bits of information around sustainability? How does CLP sort of deals with that tension?
Sure. No, thanks very much for the introduction and also for the sort of excellent presentations we've just had, and for having CLP join the discussion today. In terms of tensions of audience, I think this is a problem we've been wrestling with for a number of years. And if you look back at some of the disclosures we had in the past, in particular, if you look specifically at our sustainability reports, they were quite broad and they had very heavy on content and sort of trying to cater to everyone's needs to some extent, in terms of really providing a level of transparency that is perhaps to some degree unusual, but also through that process, leaving or losing perhaps quite a bit of focus in terms of what's important for the organization from a sustainability lens and from an ESG perspective. What are the key issues that are driving us, and how do we manage those issues? So what we've then over the last few years now instituted is a materiality assessment process that helps us focus a little bit more on the issues that are pertinent to our business, and by that extension then also pertinent to our stakeholders. So we a few years back started a process that was based on a materiality assessment process based on a megatrends analysis. So we started off with a very broad picture overview. What are the key issues that are affecting our region, that are affecting our industry, and that are affecting CLP specifically from an ESG or sustainability lens? And how do we then sort of portray to the market and to stakeholders that we are either managing them or trying to manage them and still working on sort of navigating these changes and these issues? And a lot of these sort of mega trends are pertinent from not necessarily a short-term perspective, but not from a short-term operational perspective, but really more from a strategic medium to long-term angle. And that was probably almost 5 years ago where we started this sort of approach based on mega trends, or more recently we've landed on the double materiality lens, actually, to help us really dissect the information from an enterprise value perspective in terms of what's relevant to investors specifically, and how do we cater to their needs in terms of us navigating ESG or sustainability trends, and what does that mean to our bottom line? And then the flip side being what we would sort of call other stakeholders, or the broader community, customers and employees in particular, of how do we portray our understanding of the impacts we have on the external environment, and that's both from a social and an environmental perspective, and how does that then flow into a narrative for us measuring performance and then demonstrating that we are either on par with best practice, beyond best practice, or still needing to catch up in certain areas. So this process, and the reason I'm jumping right into the materiality sort of discussion is this process really then helped us dissect the sort of diffuse needs of the various stakeholders that we are managing. And this whole separation of what do investors need to know, and what are they asking, or what do we think they should be asking, actually, that we can separate and clearly delineate in an annual report that is focused on ESG and enterprise value, and integrates our strategy and our governance and all the various risk processes that we have. And then on the other hand, how do we portray to other stakeholders that we are indeed understanding and appreciating and minimizing or optimizing our impact to the extent possible within our business. That we hope we've made some headway. I don't think we're honestly quite there yet, but we're making progress. In terms of what we've done in the last year, this whole double materiality approach has helped us really avoid duplication in our disclosures as well. That was a big issue for us, where oftentimes in prior years we wrote sort of a strategic sustainability report that if you put it side by side, the annual report was almost, writing two books about the same thing in slightly different ways. And what's the point of that? Actually, it's confusing for us internally, but it's also equally confusing to anyone, I think, who picks up these reports and tries to understand what is happening within CLP and how we navigate these issues. So that was sort of an attempt that we started over the last few years, in particular last year, and now this year again, we fine-tuned our double materiality approach yet a little bit more, and the way we now want to portray that for the coming reports, which won't come out till March of next year, is really that taking the stakeholder view on both sides of the equation and trying to really communicate that narrative much more clearly to each of them.
Thank you, Hendrik. Yeah, definitely. We are definitely looking forward to reviewing your next year's report. And thank you for sharing your thoughts around that. As I said, that tension between those different key stakeholders and how you are dealing with with having to respond to different, very different requirements. I've got a couple of follow-up questions, but before going there, I'm going to ask Austin. Yeah, really the same question. So obviously, Austin, you've we've reviewed for the last number of years integrated report for PMI, and obviously there is again that tension that I'd like you to talk about in terms of having to respond to your different key stakeholders.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, first off, I guess similar to Hendrik, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for being here. It's great. A lot of people on the line probably know I helped to run this project for 5 years at WBCSD. So it's really nice to be on the other side of the sort of virtual table today for the launch event. So thank you, Blanca and Julian.
Oh, thank you.
And congratulations on the successful publication. I know how much hard work goes into that. I think more to address your question, for PMI, there's sort of an extra kind of layer to the puzzle, right? So we're a US listed and headquartered company. And so for us, our annual report is in the form of a 10K to the SEC, to the Stock Exchange Commission in the US. And there are certain thresholds for inclusion of information on that report that focus on financial materiality through the lens of what the US Supreme Court would call a reasonable investor, right? And so because of that, there's sort of a fairly narrow subset of sustainability related or ESG information that we're really including in our annual report in the first place. But, as Jennifer is saying, that leaves US listed companies, including PMI, in a position where, well, what do we do? There's a wide range of potential sustainability related content that a very broad range of stakeholders that Jennifer was talking about are interested in. So, where does that leave us? And so historically, for a lot of American companies, including us, that's in the form of sort of a standalone report that's separate from that annual filing to the SEC to the from the 10K, right? And so I think for us, in terms of our journey, we started this with UN Global Compacts, communications on progress. We did that for a couple of years. Then similar to what Hendrik's saying, we undertook our own materiality assessments, a couple of those, and began to produce sort of a standalone sustainability report. And that standalone sustainability report really reported against relevant GRI and SASB standards for different stakeholder interests. And then eventually we went into the direction of an integrated report. So we started looking more at the integrated reporting principles. I think with our transformation journey, we're trying to substantially overhaul our product portfolio in a relatively quick period of time. So inherently, there's a lot of trade-offs between financial capital and other capital. So that seemed to be making sense to us. But what we found is because this information is not included in our 10K, we really had to target a very wide range of stakeholders in our standalone reporting, right? So that could be, current and potential employees, as Jennifer was saying. It could be ratings and ranking agencies. It could be NGOs and civil society. But we're trying to have this sort of standalone report cater to all these audiences, and that leads to a very long report. And I guess what you're calling tension. So I'd say now we're sort of at a bit of the crossroads, right? Where the trend is that a lot of these standalone reports and sustainability related information is becoming standardized, where it's starting to enter into regulation. So we're starting to face the prospect of having what historically has been sort of our standalone report be more of a disclosure, be more streamlined, be more standardized, be more targeted towards those sort of technical audiences, whether that's investors or regulators or raters and rankers. And so for us, one of the key things has been to look at, how can we begin to build out the sort of ecosystem of complementary materials that can target those other audiences and that don't necessarily overlap, as Hendrik was saying, with our kind of standalone annual report, and that can reach those audiences and talk about the topics that they're interested in, but also provide more of the qualitative and narrative data that oftentimes doesn't feature into the sort of regulatory developments. So I think that's really sort of been the tension for us, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a tension. I could think of sustainability as a very wide range of topics, and that those topics have different sort of potential risks, potential opportunities, potential impacts. And I would say that, different stakeholders, some of them are looking at completely different topics. Some of them are looking at the same topic, but are looking at it through different lenses, right? So it's not necessarily a tension. I think of it more as sort of like a puzzle, right? How do we disclose the type of information that all these different stakeholders are interested in ways that they're interested in them to meet that need? So that's sort of how I would frame it.
Great, thank you. Thank you. That's really important points both of you have raised here, and which takes me to the following question, which is about the upcoming regulatory developments. I know that obviously there are some concrete examples coming our way, particularly from the European Commission. However, for example, if I go to you, Hendrik, and I remember talking about this with you before, how is the regulatory developments are affecting CLP's sustainability disclosures?
Yeah, no, it's a very important question, and obviously compliance is always sort of a driving force for any listed company or even unlisted. But if you go back to sort of basics of why are we doing this actually? Why are we reporting all this information from a sustainability lens? It is fundamentally about, to some extent at least, holding up a mirror and this is what you look like, and then put a picture side by side. This is what you should look like as an entity, and where is the gaps here, right? And this relates specifically to performance, to impacts that we as an entity, as an organization, should be reflecting on a regular basis. And an annual cycle is obviously a useful sort of measure for that. So going back to basics, it's really about understanding where are your how is sustainability shaping your business? How is the ESG world or the mega trends, as I said earlier, really shaping you? Are you going to be able to continue operating as you are currently, given the world that we live in? What are the issues in terms of the product that you bring to market? How are you minimizing impacts of those products, and how you make them, produce them, and how you distribute them to your customers, and what are the impacts on your customers when they consume them? All of this is relevant for every company. So that in itself, an exercise of literally an annual reflection of this is what should inform your business strategy. It should inform your risk management processes. It should inform how you are planning to continue to make money and exist within the community that you operate in, and be a positive part of that community. So I think that's for us a fundamental starting point, that the frameworks that have now come through, the various standards, actually help us think through that. And that's, I would particularly sort of note the ISSB here as being a piece of the puzzle that where we are looking at ESG or sustainability related issues from the lens of how does this impact our ability to make money and, you know, please the shareholders, investors, if you like. This is what's relevant in a boardroom discussion, right? This is where we can actually get the ear of the executives, of our directors, and they perk up and understand suddenly, perhaps, in some instances, why this is important. So if we go from that basis and then shape our own sort of strategy, our own risk management processes, and the materiality assessment I outlined earlier is very useful for that on an annual basis to reflect on. The disclosure part is always last, actually. It should be fundamentally the last thing that we do, because if you haven't done the other two parts that I just mentioned, the strategy, the risk side, there's not much for you to report on except perhaps sort of going down a list of metrics and targets or issues perhaps that external people or standard setters or rating agencies think you should report on, with that you can just provide to the market without actually fully having them considered as part of how your business is being run. So the changing landscape from a regulatory perspective for us, it's great because they're finally catching up to what we've been trying to do. And through that, we're getting some additional guidance and perhaps convergence of what's expected from us. And that's, I think, particularly important for the investor side, given the plethora of ratings and queries and assessments we get, and you know, investor relations type meetings with various entities asking all sorts of interesting questions without any sort of pardon me, sometimes rhyme or reason as to why are you even asking this. This is not material to our business, but it's interesting that you think about it. So if we can standardize some of this, that helps us to actually minimize our expenditure in terms of resources that we devote to pleasing the sort of disclosure landscape. But specifically for Hong Kong, we have an ESG reporting guide that's part of the listing rules here. And that was started some 10 years ago here now. It became Comply or Explain back in 2016 only. And it's really based on a GRI type framework. It's almost like a list of things that we need to cover related to anything from greenhouse gas emissions to workforce labor standard type very basic questions. And that in itself has never been an issue for us from a regulatory side, and it's quite easy to come to terms with that. But I would argue that some of that is outdated now because it is just sort of a tick box exercise. It is just providing information to the market because the regulator is asking for it without providing context in terms of performance. So what's relevant for us is not FRAG in Hong Kong. Obviously, we're not European, but it's the ISSB that's coming through as a global standard set space. And the regulator here in Hong Kong has already said publicly that it is not a matter of if ISSB will come through as the standard for us, it's a matter of when. So we have been very much looking towards ISSB as being sort of our guiding light in terms of how we continue to shape our disclosures, just to make sure, like I mentioned earlier, that we are actually on top of the sort of best practice, that we are able to cover our strategic angle, our risk angle, but then also at the same time meeting a regulatory requirement. I think that's when we're sort of starting to hit a home run here.
No, thank you, Hendrik. It's a really good overview there how your company is being affected by these regulatory developments. Austin, any thoughts on what Hendrik had just mentioned, and obviously giving your own perspective from PMI's angle?
Yeah, well, I mean, think first off, outside of the regulation piece, what Hendrik was saying about sort of the sustainability materiality assessment and how that should really be guiding strategy and governance and so on. I mean, I think that's particularly important for us, and it allows us to tell our story, our transformation journey, right? And say by and large, raters and rankers aren't really looking at making cigarettes obsolete in their analysis per se, or they're not doing it to a very large extent. When we undertook our most recent sustainability materiality assessment in 2021, is pretty clear that product health impact was by far our biggest topic of concern from both stakeholders, also from an internal perspective, and then from an external impact perspective. And what we found was that there were really kind of two different chunks, if you will, two different pillars. There was a pillar of topics related to our product impact and a pillar of topics related to our operational impact. And I'd say, by and large, our operational impact type topics align quite well with GRI, with SASB, so on and so forth. So it could be climate, it could be water, it could be waste, but that a lot of our product impacts didn't necessarily align with these standards. And so we did have to find a way, that's actually one of the tensions. So we did have to find a way to be able to tell our story in a sort of credible and reliable and transparent way of our transformation. So yeah, I think Hendrik's points are really telling. And then I think in terms of regulation, well, firstly, I'd say it's really important to note, and this is something that Hendrik sort of alluded to, but that obviously these standards and regulations are going to be impacting different companies in different ways across different time horizons. So obviously, for companies, it's really important to understand the potential exposure and then determine what the implications may be, right? So for us, again, as a US listed company, we would be considered a large accelerated filer under the recent SEC climate related disclosure proposals.
Mm-hmm.
So that would hit us pretty directly and pretty quickly. So that would be one where we're anticipating. I'd say, we're in a position where we already undertake and disclose upon periodic climate related risk assessments, risk and opportunities assessment. We already have our carbon emission data verified externally. So I'd say, probably for this regulation, obviously continuing to build out internal processes and linkages between sustainability and legal and so on is kind of key. But that's more of like technical disclosure and less so kind of what Hendrik was talking about. I'd say for the other proposals, so CSRD and ISSB, they have their own sort of particularities, as a broader comment, I'd say, we already undertook that pretty robust materiality assessment, and that materiality assessment did, focus on this concept of double materiality. We did also identify some emerging risks as well in that assessment. So I think the work will really be, seeing, we also align our disclosures with GRI and SASB, which are the building blocks for a lot of these regulations. So I think the work is really going to be waiting for some of these final standards to come out and doing the sort of technical gap analysis, figuring out, what we need to adapt, what we need to build internal controls around. But by and large, I think what Hendrik was saying about ISSB is spot on. I don't think it will ever necessarily become a regulation in the US. I can't imagine the US SEC, at least in the short to medium term, adopting wholesale the ISSB requirements. But we do know, for example, the climate related ISSB proposal is quite similar to the SEC climate related proposal, right? And we also do anticipate that there's going to be significant demand from investors and other stakeholders for ISSB aligned disclosures, even if that disclosure doesn't necessarily show up in our regulated filings, again, in that sort of short to medium term. So regardless of how we look at it, it'll play a crucial role in the reporting landscape.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Let me just double check whether we have any questions from the audience in the chat. No, I don't think we have. We just have 1 minute left, but I wanted to ask one final question to Hendrik. And this is just a bit of a shout to everyone. Please read the publication. We actually, as part of the publication this year, we interviewed Hendrik as part of their work on a double materiality, which obviously is one of the areas we certainly want to strengthen this year. Just one question to you, Henry. I know you've touched upon double materiality quite at length during this panel discussion. Any tips for companies for companies that are starting the journey of reporting on a double materiality? Very concise.
The 10-second elevator pitch. Be open-minded and really try to get to the bottom of your impacts and where and how sustainability is relevant to your particular business, and don't be afraid of the answers you might find. And if you can manage to get through that and actually sort of respond to some of these issues meaningfully, then we're making progress here. Then we're redefining value.
Great, thank you. Austin, any final comments from you on that front? Because I know PMI has done a lot of work also on double and dynamic materiality.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, our most recent assessment was in 2021. And the results of that kind of reframed our sustainability strategy moving forward, and obviously our reporting structure as well. So yeah, I think realistically we'll probably be doing refreshes in the coming years, and then eventually we'll have to, when some of these final standards and proposals come out, we'll have to look back at it and determine whether or not any other further reboots are necessary based on the standards.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, both of you. We are out of time. So just to again, thank you profusely for your time and your busy schedules to talk to us. Thank you everyone for having attended today's session. Please, if I can repeat, read the annual publication this year for Reporting Matters if you haven't done so. Again, for those of you who I think will be many of you who are in the process of putting together your sustainability disclosures, well done, please. Best of luck. We are looking forward to reviewing your reports next year cycle. And again, thank you so much for attending today's session. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at reportingmatters@wbcsd.org. So thank you again, and have a very good rest of the day.
Thanks, Blanca.
Thank you, Blanca. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.